So how are things at home? It's been a while since the invasion, and many people around here are wondering how our people took the news. It's mixed, I suppose, which makes sense when you think about it. There are around 20 billion people on Ortus alone, and even if all our troops were lost, those 12 million wouldn't even make a dent. As usual, Tezar and Nishi knew what they were doing by spreading recruitment efforts across the entire nation. That way, those who mourn loss of their loved ones are always overshadowed by billions who celebrate our victory. But enough about that, tell me of your visit to the Aramathi archives. I wish I could go myself, but it's still technically a war zone. In all honesty, Professor, it's been mostly frustrating. We've gathered tons of new data, there's no denying that, but the answers to most important questions still elude us. Then start from the beginning. Very well. It all began in early 18th century. Aramathi called it Sol 3 incident. Their observation station picked up sudden, massive energy signature underneath Istanbul. They had no idea what it was, but their expedition leader, a Merali known as Nven, picked up something else. Apparently, this unknown object was a source of an anomaly known as time pulses. Highly destructive, if completely unexplained phenomenon that moved at the speed of light and was more devastating the further it traveled from the origin point. We were too close to be truly affected by it, but the Aramathi coalition was in serious danger. They spent almost 300 years to figure out how to stop these pulses before they reached their worlds, but in the end they failed to find a solution, and their coalition was torn apart along with everything in the way of these time pulses. Okay, but if they were a civilization that mastered spaceflight, couldn't they just outrun this anomaly? I mean, if something moved at the speed of light, we could stay ahead of it for years, and I'm sure they were more advanced back then. True and not true, Professor. See, the Aramathi were using a different way of interstellar travel. According to their archives, stars of Milky Way were connected by something they called hyperlane network, highly energized routes that allowed travel from star to star, but only along some predetermined paths. It's all rather complicated, and we're still working on the physics behind it, since the Aramathi no longer possess that knowledge, but we can tell one thing: the Aramathi haven't created these hyperlanes. They were already there when they took to the stars, and they merely discovered them. Still, they encountered two issues. First one was the fact that these pulses apparently disrupted hyperlanes along the way, causing them to act in an unpredictable manner, often destroying ships that tried to pass through. And the second issue was these hyperlanes themselves. They were arrayed in such a way that the Aramathi had to go through Sol system in order to reach the rest of the galaxy, and the closer to Earth they got, the more dangerous the journey became. Only 2 ships managed to get to our old system, and they were all too heavily damaged to continue their journey. So the Aramathi were trapped. I can't tell I envy them, looking at approaching doom knowing that you can't even understand it, let alone do anything to prevent it. It must have been horrible for them. If the records are anything to be believed, it was. They witnessed destruction of their worlds and complete collapse of their society, but like us, they were saved in the last moment by sudden discovery of an ancient portal on their last inhabitable planet. They found it mere months before it too was destroyed, and thanks to their Merali scientists, they were able to get it to work and fled here. And after that, their story is pretty much like ours. At first, they struggled to adapt to desert conditions of New Sajar, since their original homeworld was more of an oceanic planet, but after some years they managed to stop the decline and began to slowly expand, until they reached the stars again, which, mind you, took them almost 200 years, since they took almost none of their technology with them. Those who passed through the portal were nothing more than terrified refugees, resigned to their fate. Their best and brightest were already gone, which meant that their subsequent technological regress was even more severe, especially since they have lost their Merali scientists. I've been meaning to ask you that, Doctor. The first speaker mentioned these Merali several times, but so far we never encountered even a single one of them. That's because last of the Merali died over a century ago. Though they were the ones who saved races of the Coalition, the exile turned out bad for them. Something in the atmosphere of New Sajar disagreed with Merali biology. Nothing drastic or violent, but it made them sterile, and over the years they just slowly passed out, unable to find a solution. And a shame they didn't, because if Aramathi records are correct, they were the most brilliant race to ever walk under the stars. Weak by nature, the Merali mastered their world by sheer power of their intelligence, and the pace of their progress was astounding. Let's use the founding of Rome as a reference point. If humanity started to develop with Merali speed during founding of Rome, then by the times of Julius Caesar he would have made his journey to Egypt on an oil-propelled ship and witnessed pyramids in electric light. That's amazing, and it makes their story even more sad, since even their brilliance was not enough to save them. Shame indeed, Doctor, but what about the other race, the warriors? I shouldn't tell you, truth be told, it's all been classified, but Ah, hell, you'll probably learn sooner or later anyway. The Uzema, the warriors, they were still alive when we met the Aramathi for the first time. Some of them, anyway. There were never too many of them. Their race was naturally violent, so Aramathi kept their numbers in check at no more than 2 billion, and when the Zracon landed, they rounded Uzema in separate camps. They were strong, aggressive and resilient, and gave Zracon a lot of trouble during the invasion, which made them a liability. The Union tried to convert them, but failed repeatedly, so they finally gave up and found another use for them. All those Aramathi slaves, they had to be fed, so the Zracon, they used the Uzema to solve that problem. You mean they... Oh no. I'm sorry, Professor. Our light troops found several processing facilities and we managed to check the DNA composition of the nutrients produced there. They match with the Uzema. Do the Aramathi know? They don't seem to, Professor, not even their resistance. It seems they all believe the Uzema were exterminated after the conquest. I will have to talk with the Chancellor about this. If this information leaks without proper preparation, there will be chaos. Thank you for telling me. Apologies for bearing such news, but at least now we know we're doing a good thing in this war. When Braniski and Lin heard about this, they were furious, so if you're going to talk with Mr. Tessa, then do ask him one thing. Tell him to keep our officers under control. Until the Aramathi are safe, we can't allow ourselves to be rash, no matter how difficult it will be to wait. Because if we lose, all of this will happen again. Thank you, Doctor. I'll do my best. Good day, citizens, and welcome back to Second Chance. We return to our nation just a few weeks after the bittersweet conclusion of our military campaign on the surface of New Sajar, where we managed to eliminate all forces of Zracon Union, who occupied the planet for almost 2 decades now. Unfortunately, even though our victory was complete, it was also very costly, as our army lost almost 8 million soldiers in less than 2 months, which makes Battle of New Sajar the single most bloody engagement in human history. But surprisingly, it seems that our people back in core systems haven't lost their war fervor, and recruiting centers across our worlds are once again full of potential recruits, eager to fill our ranks once more. And while this is a bit unexpected, it is also welcome for several reasons. First is the most obvious one. We still have one planet to liberate, and while Tintragal is less defended than New Sajar, it would still be a bad idea to storm it just with our current diminished army. And the second one is a bit more long-term issue. See, even though we managed to win on New Sajar, 2 decades of occupation and slavery left Aramathi inhabitants in a sorry state, and as our forces began long process of liberating one labor camp after the other, they realized that our new allies will need our help during rebuilding. So, all the more reasons for us to replenish the losses we took. But while our nation is still celebrating our victory, our government needs to deal with yet another issue: finances. As expected, the cost of interstellar war turned out to be extremely high. First, we had to spend tons of money and resources to actually build up our forces, both fleet and the army, but now, as they are all far away fighting in our name, we also have to maintain them, which turned out to be a huge drain on our budget. And no wonder. Our armies need to supply millions of soldiers on the surface of worlds we are not used to, and our fleet constantly needs to maintain ships far away from home bases. And that, of course, costs money. Aside from regular supplies like food and munitions, our ships need to be regularly refueled, and since we don't have time to send them back to Arvo every few months, we had to come up with another solution: a supply train. Basically, government of OCN constructed an entire armada of fast transport vessels that constantly transport supplies to our forces on the front lines, but in the recent months we have encountered an issue. The size of our fleet grew so much that our transports weren't enough to supply them all, which meant that our Admiralty had to contract private captains to keep Task Force Manticore operational, and that, of course, costs even more money. And together with all other issues, our Ministry of Finances have soon reported that we are on the verge of going broke in the coming months. So, in order to prevent that, we have to once again resort to selling our advanced technologies to other civilizations, but this time there was a bit of an outcry when we did that. See, our regular trading partners, Alir, Shalani, Sondrithans and Jir, were already exchanging their knowledge with us, so in order to actually earn money, we had to approach some of the less reliable empires, like capitalists of a Hadi conglomerate or dictators of Fafsim and Tizhnig. Once again, we tried to exchange our knowledge where we could, but this time in most cases our new trade partners weren't willing to spill their secrets, even though they were more than happy to pay huge sums of money and energy for ours. So, while it will definitely help us in the short term, it may be that in the long run we're actually making our potential future enemies even stronger. But there's not much we can do about it now. If there was another way to make some quick cash, we would have taken it, but unfortunately our options were limited. So, we can only hope that we won't wake up one day to see our own technology working against us. But as we were trading with other nations, we have realized that we have yet another contact on our list, and that one was just as unexpected as it gets. All of a sudden, we were contacted by yet another nation of Shalani, the aquatic horses that lived southeast of our core territory. At first, we thought that something bad must have happened there, perhaps the coalition suffered from some sort of civil war, and that this new entity was led by rebels of some kind, but as it turned out, our predictions were far from truth, because, as it happened, the interstellar Shalani commonality was established by the coalition itself, with all sides agreeing to it. Basically, it seems that Shalani government wanted to create some sort of free economy zone, where private investors are only lightly taxed, and there is very little oversight on galactic imports and exports. So, in a way, this new nation is still part of old coalition, except it has far more freedom when it comes to economic growth, which might be good and bad thing depending on the way this new commonality will act. After all, lack of oversight may be beneficial to expansion of private ventures, but it may also attract some unsavory characters willing to profit from relaxed laws. Only time will tell what this freeport will become, but one thing is sure: if anyone had any doubts about Shalani commitment to personal freedoms, those doubts are now surely gone. The coalition handed a considerable amount of space and independence to the private sector and trusted their citizens to do the right thing, hoping that everyone will profit from it. An egalitarian government through and through. And few months later, another surprise has happened. Ever since we began our war, our stations have been picking up some scattered signals from a seemingly empty system between borders of OCN and Zracon Union. Signals that, thanks to our experience on the matter, we were able to identify as early attempts at interplanetary communications, very similar to the ones we used nearly 4 decades ago. So, our comm arrays have been pointed in the direction of that system, and after a few weeks of scanning we received a confirmation. There was yet another nation there, and it seemed like it was a new player on the interplanetary scene, a race that only recently managed to take to the stars. We listened to their communications for a bit, and once we had enough data to translate their language, we sent them a welcoming message, and thankfully the response was a peaceful one. This new nation, the Alliance of New Beginning, was inhabited by another race of plantoids who called themselves Queptilium, but unlike their other plantoid neighbors, the Zracon, Queptilians weren't religious fanatics. Instead, they were a democracy very similar to our own, with citizens using computer networks to constantly monitor their government and ensure that all decisions are based on the idea of rational consensus. So, those similarities greatly helped us in our first contact, and after just a few talks we were on good terms with the Alliance, and were able to establish more nuanced relations with non-aggression and research pacts. But while the Queptilium were happy to meet us, they were not as happy when we shared with them the knowledge of the rest of the galaxy. Because, you see, they have took to the stars hoping to become explorers, just like us, and now when they finally managed to leave their system, it turned out that they are right in the middle of a war between two empires that are infinitely more powerful and advanced than them. Regardless, after reading through all our data, they were grateful for sharing it, but it still seemed like they were shocked to learn just how hostile the galaxy turned out to be. They were lucky, because they encountered us and not the Zracon first, but they still must have realized just how exposed they are, and how easily other, more established empires could wipe them out or annex them. So, perhaps their friendly demeanor is based on fear. If the Zracon decided to attack them, like they did with the Aramathi, we would be their only line of defense. So, overall, an interesting development. We will have to see what our government will do about it. But despite these new discoveries, our war still raged on, but as our forces were preparing to move on Tintregal, we intercepted yet another message, this time from the north. After long and bloody conflict, the relentless hordes of Biliuan Mind managed to completely break forces of Kingdom of Yadra and force them to surrender. And it wasn't just some regular peace deal, because it forced the kingdom to hand over 2 planets to the Mind, and one of those planets was none other than Yadrani in Mazaka system, a homeworld of their race and capital of their kingdom. So things must have went even worse than we thought there, if the Mind was able to acquire such an important planet right in the middle of Yadran space. But while Yadran defeat may not seem too bad for us at a first glance, they are our rivals after all, becoming a victim to the Biliuans is a fate we wouldn't wish on even the worst of our enemies. Because, as we have learned from intercepted messages, the Mind doesn't care about those it conquered. They do not seek to convert them like the Zracon, nor do they want to expand their slave labor force like the Yanari. No, the Mind wants only to consume all biological matter and use it to grow and expand until, as far as we can tell, there is nothing left, and it will be forced to turn on itself for sustenance. And the implications of that are simple and blood-chilling. Assuming Yadrani was in similar size to Ortus, we're probably looking at billions of Yadran citizens reduced to nothing more than livestock, constantly hunted and preyed upon without any hope of rescue. So even though our governments hate each other, OCN has sent official condolences to the Yadran king, because in the long run, every victory scored by the Mind will make it stronger and more rabid, and that is bad news for the entire galaxy. But enough about problems of others, we still have plenty of issues of our own after all. The most important of which was the sudden return of Zracon Radiant Host. After our fleet regrouped at Fidolam and began its approach towards Tintregal, our sensors picked up Zracon fleet entering the system. Immediately our naval crews steeled themselves for the fight, but to their surprise, our enemies seemed unwilling to fight as they stayed on the edge of the system for several days without moving to intercept us. But then, that surprise turned into terror. The Zracon weren't ignoring us, they were heading to now undefended Aramus, where their fleet could easily do to us exactly what we did to them, and bombard New Sajar. As soon as Admiral Lin realized that, she ordered a full retreat. We had no chance to stop the Zracon from leaving this system, but we still had to chase them to help our ground forces and Aramathi citizens, who would be sitting ducks. But that's when our flexible system of wormholes turned out to be problematic. Yes, we could jump to every system within range of our generators, but if we want to move from system to system, we actually had to make 2 jumps instead of 1. First one back to the wormhole generator, and second one to the final destination. And that, of course, takes time. Precious time that we do not have, because Zracon fleet entered Aramus system even before Task Force Manticore was able to turn around. And the truth was unforgiving. Even at full speed, it would take Manticore weeks, maybe even up to 2 months to reach New Sajar, while the Zracon will be there in just 2 or 3 weeks. So a message was sent to General Branitsky, and together with his troops he began a frantic dash to build as many defenses as possible. His men built bunkers, shield generators, and dug kilometers of underground tunnels, but as they were working day and night, one thing was obvious: it would not be enough to save everyone. The Aramathi will once again have to suffer the bombardment of their homeworld, and this time, unlike us, the Zracon probably won't restrict their barrage to just military targets, and we won't even have a chance to shoot back. But, in a way, Zracon attack might just be an opportunity we were waiting for. Until now, our fleets chased each other around without any action, but now that Radiant Host forced our hand, we have a chance for a decisive victory here. If everything goes right, the war will end just where it started, at New Sajar. And while first bombs began to fall back at home, in the orbit of Redaman Prime to be precise, our observers witnessed something completely unexpected. All of a sudden, an entire flotilla of battered civilian vessels entered the system and asked for our help. At first, everyone thought they were Aramathi refugees, sent here to avoid the rest of the war, but after establishing contact with these ships, our operators realized that these vessels belonged to Kingdom of Yadra, and the people aboard them were Yadran citizens. This revelation took us completely by surprise, and was immediately brought to the Chancellor's office, where it caused complete chaos. Turns out, this civilian fleet were refugees from planets recently captured by the Billion Mind, and for some reason, they decided to flee to us, not to one of their remaining worlds. And of course, as you might expect, at first OCN was very suspicious about the whole thing. After all, these people were citizens of an openly hostile race that encroached on our territory. But after several of our officials boarded these refugee ships, the news they brought back convinced the government to relent. In short, these Yadrans were broken, terrified, starving, and the vast majority of them were in dire need of medical assistance. But most importantly, they brought stories with them. Stories about the fall of Yadrani and Katanab, and what happened afterwards. And to say that these tales were blood-curdling would be an understatement. Once Yadran defenses fell, Billiwan swarms, because they cannot be called armies, simply broke into thousands smaller groups and set off in all directions, slaughtering and eating everything in their path. There were no negotiations, no demands, and most certainly no mercy. But, thanks to all that chaos, many Yadrans managed to flee, and while many of them traveled to other planets of their kingdom, this group decided to take their chance with us. As it turned out, most of them were members of a newly growing political power on the Yadran scene, a party that claimed that maybe their kingdom should be a bit less isolationist and more open to other cultures, if only to gain some allies against the Billy ones. So, despite our suspicions, we really had no other choice than to offer those refugees help. But before that could happen, we sent them only one question. Are you willing to obey the laws of OCN? The answer was yes, and so the Yadrans were allowed to settle at Redamon Prime, and by the time last of the ships finished unloading its terrified survivors, their number grew to 1 billion, making them an officially recognized group within our nation. It remains to be seen whether this will be a good or a bad thing. But that was not the end of our surprises. Shortly after those refugees arrived, another ship appeared on our borders and attempted to contact us. Only thing was, this ship belonged to the Billion Mind, and aside from their initial encounter, they never contacted us. Reluctantly, our border comm operators opened the channel and witnessed something no one, not even our brightest minds from the Science Council, thought possible. This ship, as it happened, was operated by a single drone, calling itself 7/9 of Katanab, and that was just the first surprise, because when it contacted us, it introduced itself as I, not we. This prompted our confused operators to patch the comm channel to the Science Council itself, and soon talks with this drone were taken over by Professor Tanwa herself. Fascinated about this anomalous situation, she began questioning the drone. How is it possible that it could talk to us, and of course, how did it manage to break free of the mind's influence? Sadly, while the drone had answers to the first question, the mind kept linguistic data in its consciousness for those occasions it needed it, the second question remained a mystery, as the drone had no idea how it managed to develop individual sentience and not die after its connection with the mind was severed. All it knew was that the mind wouldn't let it live afterward, so it fled towards the closest inhabited space, ours, and asked for asylum. And let's face it, if Yadran refugees were suspicious, this is even more. But after a few days of deliberation, during which the mind itself contacted us and demanded to hand over its rogue drone, OCN decided to allow this bizarre Billy one to stay, if only to learn a bit more about its mysterious race. And the weirdest thing of all was the fact that the drone, once it was assured of our peaceful intentions, turned out to be surprisingly smart. So smart that it could very well aspire for a position on the Science Council. Even better, its ship was very similar to our science vessels, so in a way we earned another alien scientist. And while many of our researchers would love nothing more than to dissect this alien, once we granted it asylum, it was granted the same rights as our other citizens, and, under close watch of some of our special forces, was sent to the frontier to prove itself as a true scientist by exploring uncharted worlds. That way we'll be able to keep an eye on it while keeping it far away from our worlds and citizens. If it proves itself, then it will be allowed to land on one of our worlds. Until then, it will be our anomaly searching for other anomalies. This galaxy becomes stranger with every passing day. But all those revelations can't distract us from our main objective now, and with return of the Radiant Host, it seems that we're finally going to have that decisive engagement we wanted, because this time they are led by a different admiral, who, apparently, is not willing to continue his predecessor's campaign of hit-and-run operations. So, it seems that our first real space battle is upon us, and as Manticore began its final approach towards New Sajar, all our naval crews wondered just one thing: what the Zracon had in store for us. And the answer to that question was Light Show. See, while we had the first shot in this battle, due to our long-range cruisers, once Zracon Armada fired back, it became obvious that they build spaceships in a slightly different way than we do. Our ships, in general, are equipped with various weapons, coil guns, laser turrets, missile launchers and disruptors, in order to present varied firepower, to be effective against any defenses our opponents might have. But as soon as Zracon ships fired their first shots, we realized that all their vessels were uniformly equipped with laser beams, and quite surprisingly, a bit outdated models at that, ones with less firepower than the ones we used. A good thing, but the sheer number of enemy ships was enough to nullify that disadvantage. Sure, we may have more advanced weapons, but even basic laser beam is dangerous, especially when you have hundreds of them firing at you. But the more important issue was the battle itself, as our men had no experience in it. Until now, when we fought, it was against single, slow or even stationary targets, but this time with over 100 warships on both sides, our usual strategy was quickly thrown out of the window, replaced by complete chaos, as both our and Zracon ships scrambled to avoid incoming fire, while trying to place themselves in a good position to shoot back. But it quickly became obvious that with so many shots fired, it is nearly impossible for a single ship to avoid all damage, and soon first cracks began to show, as both our and Zracon corvettes began losing their shields and suffered critical damage. Comm channels were constantly filled with orders, requests and notifications, and all our captains and their crews desperately tried to stay on top of all those red dots that clogged their sensors. But among all this chaos, our 3 cruisers stood proud and strong, providing a base of fire, which, in turn, proved to be their downfall. After our formations clashed, Zracon Commander realized that we have presented our 3 flagships on a silver platter, as they hanged back when fired their massive weapons into enemy formation. But because they were stationary, they were an extremely easy target, and soon almost every single Zracon ship fired into our cruisers, and against such overwhelming firepower, it was only a matter of time before our flagships were destroyed. First fell CSV Theseus, carved in half by enemy laser beams. Then our Admiral's flagship, CSV Thor, suffered a critical hit straight into the main superstructure and literally fell apart. CSV Lazarus managed to hold on for a bit longer, but with Zracon lasers cutting off pieces of hull, soon too it went down in flames. For a second the comm channels were quiet, but after a few seconds of sheer panic, the voice of Admiral Lin ordered everyone to keep fighting. She made it out alive, only barely able to reach her escape pod, and as soon as she was clear of the blast zone, she used her pod's comm array to keep the fleet going. Soon, one of our destroyers picked her up, and the battle continued with ferocity, with our ships slowly blasting enemy formations to pieces, now that they were out of easy targets. And then, all of a sudden, it was over. With a sound like thunder, ships of the Radiant host all engaged their emergency drives and disappeared into the warp, withdrawing from the fight. And so, on 23rd of September 2239, the battle above New Sajar was won by Ocean Fleet. But just like with our battle on the surface of the planet, this victory was a bitter one, because, aside from our cruisers, we have also lost many other ships. Overall, out of 55 vessels we began this fight with, we have lost 21, 17 corvettes, including our very first one, Spitfire, our cruisers and our frigate, the Dark Wanderer. Sad way to go, for this ship was perhaps the last relic of an unknown civilization, and now, like the rest of it, it was gone, its wreckage silently drifting through the void, a tomb for almost 300 of our soldiers. Interestingly, we haven't lost even a single destroyer in this fight, though some of them were actually pretty badly damaged in the end. Overall, with our 21 ships lost, we have also suffered casualties of around 3,500 men, most of them amongst the crews of our cruisers. Some crew members managed to flee their ships in the escape pods, but in all the chaos there were only about 150 of them, most of them wounded. Admiral Lin herself suffered a heavy wound, losing an arm and an ear in an explosion, but thankfully our Navy doctors were able to stabilize her without trouble. But all losses aside, this was still a victory. The Radiant host lost 39 of their 68 ships, including all of their destroyers, and there is also a chance that, during their retreat, they have lost even more ships in the warp, because they jumped from the inside of system's gravity well, a move that is extremely risky, especially for vessels that were already damaged. So, with the Zracon fleet out of the way, our planetary forces, and the Aramathi, were once again safe, although they took some significant losses, especially among civilian population, due to enemy bombing runs. But now, with their safety ensured, and with enemy fleet limping home for repairs, we have an opportunity to strike at now undefended Tintregal and take back second and last Aramathi planet from Zracon occupants. So, after just few days of rest and repairs, Admiral Lin ordered her battered task force to set a course for Fidilon system. Our doctors tried to convince her to come down to one of our field hospitals on the surface of New Sajar, but she refused and established her new command center aboard CSV Interceptor, the ship that saved her escape pod. But as her ships began moving towards the edge of the system, their sensors picked up another Zracon vessel, a single fast civilian transport with markings of Zracon government. For a moment there, everyone thought that this would be some sort of suicidal delaying strike, but then Zracon ship did something odd. It hailed us, and the alien aboard it asked permission to come aboard. Take a breath, Admiral. You've been twitching for the last hour. Are you that stressed about these talks? I just don't feel too excited about meeting their leader is all, especially since we know what they did on his orders. I just don't know if I can keep myself under control in his presence. Believe me, I'd love to tear off his eye stack just as much as all of us here, but I'd advise against it. Buggers can be pretty intense when it comes down to close combat, but you don't have to worry now. We've won in no small part thanks to you, and it is coming to us to grovel and ask for peace, not the other way around. Besides, even if Presenter will try anything, there will be 3 of us there, plus a company of your Marines as protection.
Actually, our delegation will number 4 members, General Branitsky.
Another one of yours to make things even, First Speaker.
No, your Chancellor has requested to be present during these talks.
What? How? He was still on orders last time I heard. No way he'd make it here this fast. He won't be here in flesh, General. Some technicians from our embassy came in a few days ago and installed a direct link back to Ortus, same one as I had on Thor. In fact, we're receiving Tessa's signal right now. Engineer Halter, please patch it to the conference room, priority red. Good day to you, First Speaker, Admiral, General. I apologize for such an intrusion, but as an elected leader of OCN, my presence during these talks really is mandatory.
Have you been briefed, Chancellor?
Of course. Let's hope our meeting with Chief Presenter will go well, even though, I have to admit, it is very much unexpected, especially since they were the ones who initiated it. Agreed. Come to think of it, I think this is the first meeting between us and the Zracon where they're not trying to kill or convert us. Don't be so sure, Admiral. You know how fanatical they can get. Ah, here's the bastard himself. We should... Blessings of the everlasting light upon you, Shadows. I am Chief Presenter Spagrum by Light's Grace, leader of the Zracon Union. I apologize for interruption, but I know that words that you utter are not truly yours, instead placed in your mind by the darkness. I pray that my presence and my blessings will be enough to break its hold over your souls, so we might all converse in the spirit of peace and mutual understanding like true children of the light. Excuse me, Presenter, but I believe there has been some misunderstanding. We thought you arrived here to negotiate peace between our nations, not to preach your religion. But those two are the same thing, Shadow. If but you search your soul, you will realize that as soon as you will embrace the light, peace will follow, and we will all be able to bring it towards all corners of the galaxy, as all true Zracon should. We are not Zracon, Chief Presenter. We are human and Aramathi and Kithri, and despite what your religion tells you, we are not your enemies. So you say, Human Shadow, and I'm sure you believe your own words, a fact that makes this exchange all the more sad, for you cannot even tell how deeply the corruption is rooted within you. When we encountered the Aramathi Shadows, we knew that the great enemy will not respond kindly to our successful conversions. We knew that darkness will never relent, and it used you, Human Shadows, as tools of its vengeance. Still though we tried, we prayed, we sent sermon after sermon and prayer after prayer towards you, hoping that you will be strong enough to find truth in our words, but we were wrong. A mistake that costed us countless souls of Aramathi Shadows, souls that could have been saved. Then perhaps our cultures have a different concept of saving, Zracon, but that doesn't matter now. What matters is the future. Your army and your fleet have been destroyed. It is up to you whether you will continue your pointless crusade and bring more death to your people, or will you withdraw your forces from Aramathi worlds and accept peace between our nations. But we are at peace, Shadow. Our goal was never to bring war to you, but merely to save you from the corruption that rots your souls. But now I see that we were perhaps too hasty. Our devotion made us too eager, and we failed to realize how powerful slaves of darkness were. In a way, Shadow, you offered us a lesson in humility that the Zracon desperately needed. So if we need to withdraw to learn this lesson, then we will do so, for that is what the light demands of us, to ensure our future efforts to free you will be successful. If you say so, Chief Presenter. As long as you're willing to accept the terms of our truce, we're willing to— Apologies, Chancellor, but what the hell is the meaning of this? The Zrak just said he's going to keep fighting us and you're willing to give it time to regroup and rebuild his forces. After all we've done to get so far. Admiral, is there a soundproof panel between us and Presenter? Then raise it. Thank you. General, I do not appreciate you second-guessing me when we are so close to securing peace. What peace? You can bet he's going to send its forces at us once again as soon as they're done rebuilding, and you know they're not going to make the same mistakes. If you will allow it to walk away now, it's going to bite us in the ass sooner than you might think. And what do you propose we do, General? Our fleet and army were victorious, but at this moment they are not in shape for another campaign deep in enemy territory. Our supply lines are stretched to the limit, and for every day of this war our nation grows weaker. And finally, the goal of this war was to ensure freedom and safety of the Aramathi. Now that it's done, we should focus on rebuilding, not at further destruction. The best way to ensure their safety, and our as well for that matter, is to eliminate those who wish to destroy us. I'm sure First Speaker agrees with me now that she has seen everything Zrax did to her people.
I would love nothing more but to exact revenge, General Branitsky, but after 2 decades of slavery my people need peace, not another decade of fear and uncertainty. My personal ambitions do not matter now. I stand with your Chancellor.
Thank you, First Speaker. So, now that that's been dealt with, could I ask you to control yourself, General? Thank you. You can lower the panel now, Admiral. Very well, Chief Presenter. If you're willing to accept our deal and withdraw your troops from Tintragal, then we will have truce. If you wish to remain shackled and bound by the great enemy Shadow, then I weep for your soul. But know that we will return to save you, just as we have almost saved the Aramathi. If you will come into our borders with hostile intentions ever again, Zracon, you can be assured that our forces will stop at nothing to ensure your threat is removed from the galaxy by any means necessary. This meeting is over. Our Marines will escort you to your shuttle. So be it, Human Shadow. Gloat. Celebrate your fleeting victory. The Zracon faced worse threats than you before, and even if we were beaten, we always prevailed and learned from those battles. You may have delayed your enlightening, but we will not relent until the galaxy is free of darkness. Your people will be saved, but not you, Chancellor Tessa, for I have seen your soul. In your underlings I see a spark, a faint flicker of light that might one day blossom into true enlightenment. But in you, I see only evil. Your mind is a mind of wickedness, and your heart is a heart of darkness. I can only pray your garden will realize it before you drag it into the abyss. And that was it. Despite our quite justified suspicions, Chief Presenter Spagrum was true to his word, and his forces withdrew from Tintragal, and the planet was officially transferred into our hands. And just like that, the war between OCN and Zracon Union was over, and citizens across our worlds took to the streets to celebrate our victory, but also to mourn all the losses we took while achieving it. But while celebrations are relatively straightforward on our core worlds, on the surface of Tintragal and New Sajar, there is an absolute explosion of cheerful revelry. Billions of Aramathi are taking to the ruined streets of their now retaken cities to cheer and cry and drink and sing, especially sing. According to the reports, it seems that Aramathi have a certain affinity for singing, even though to human ears it sounds more like growling straight out of black metal concert. Still, revelry lasts for days, but it is just as sad an affair as it is a happy one. On one hand, the joy is understandable. The Aramathi are once again able to resume their lives without being enslaved, and without constant fear for their lives, but on the other, they have lost much over the years, and only now they properly have a chance to mourn all they have lost, and start rebuilding their society. Still, even though many of them haven't heard of our deal with their first speaker before, it seems they're eager to become part of our nation, at least for now, until their gratitude wears off. But, as you were able to see there, not every Aramathi is busy with celebrations. Some of them, those who suffered most under Zracon occupation, have banded together and formed an isolationist party in hopes of preventing other races from meddling in their lives ever again. And interestingly, they approached none other but our Chief of Engineering Division, Professor Nestor Lachinov, to become the face of their group in Council's politics. At one hand, it's odd. They are a faction that wants nothing to do with the aliens, but has an alien at the helm. But on the other, it shows that those Aramathi are quick to adapt to their new reality as citizens of our nation, since they approach already established and well-respected man to become their leader. More surprisingly still, though, is the fact that Lachinov agreed. After all, this isolationist party isn't exactly in line with our own ethics, so perhaps he has some ulterior motive for accepting the position. Or perhaps he simply agrees with those Aramathi. But until we know for sure, we'll have to keep an eye on the situation. As said, those ideas are not exactly what we want to promote, so the Council will keep a close watch on this new political power, and ensure it remains nothing more but a small local movement. We need to focus on rebuilding, after all, and political arguments are not going to help with that. And speaking of rebuilding, while there is a ton of tidying up to do, the Aramathi worlds are actually surprisingly well developed. Granted, most of the installations were built by the Aramathi themselves, but it seems that the Zracon have also constructed quite a lot of infrastructure that will be useful to us, which, when you think about it, is understandable. As we know, Zracon evolved on a methane world, so they were unable to bring large numbers of their people to Aramathi worlds because the atmosphere was simply too alien to them. So in order to make the most use of their slaves, they had to provide them with places to walk at, a fact that will now work to our benefit. Still, there are some places that, regardless of their usefulness to the Zracon occupants, have been marked for demolition. The most obvious targets are, of course, temples built across the land, as no one wants to have them around. Some of our scientists protested, claiming that we could learn a lot from them, but the first speaker was adamant, and over the next few years every temple of everlasting light was reduced to rubble. But while those temples were burning, our forces in the countryside dealt with yet another issue. The Zracon had a number of so-called slave-processing facilities on both planets, and they had to be dismantled without general Aramathi population learning about their existence, because those places were, well, let's just say abhorrent, and their presence would be very, very bad for morale. Now, in theory, we could probably learn quite a lot from these facilities, but once again, First Speaker demanded to blow them all to hell, and we obliged. No matter how useful that data might have been, it is not worth it, not after we've uncovered what was happening there. Instead, we'll replace those facilities with open embassies and enclaves of our other citizens, humans and Kithri. Long walk ahead of us, but thankfully, with the war over, we can now return to what we were always good at, being explorers and builders. And in fact, when the dust settled, the Council officially declassified files about certain discoveries that were made during our conflict. The reason for that classification was simple. What we found was so odd, so incomprehensibly dangerous, that if our people learned about it in the middle of the war, it could plunge our entire nation into panic. The first declassified file was unassumingly named Obstacles, a name that doesn't sound that bad until you realize just what our explorers had in mind. The first discovery was made during a joint expedition CSV Tesla took with one of the Alir Science vessels. Together, these ships ventured to Walton system, where they found something completely insane, a massive creature made seemingly only out of energy that was staying close to the main star of the system. At first, we thought that this might be something similar to the Void Cloud, but a quick scan ensured that this time we're dealing with something far, far more dangerous. This thing, called Stellar Devourer, was apparently feeding off the energy of the star in this system, and while it seemed uninterested in our ships, it destroyed all probes we sent towards it without hesitation. And, to put it bluntly, this being commands power that we can't even dream of getting at this point. So for now we're going to stay away from it, and hope it won't decide to come along and eat one of our own stars. Another two discoveries were shared by Miravandians, a nation to the south of us. In one of their systems, Uralian, they have encountered a lone ship that was not responding to any communication attempts. We encountered a fair share of derelicts in recent years, but this one was different. First, it was obviously operational, even though Miravandian sensors couldn't pick up any life forms on board of it. And second, far more important fact, was that it was absolutely bristling with weapon systems and defenses, and when Miravandian explorers tried to approach it, this dreadnought vaporized their ships in a matter of seconds. Interestingly enough, it seems to be patrolling a system with 3 potentially habitable planets there, so perhaps there was a reason for its presence, even though we had no idea what it might be. And finally, in the next system over, Miravanians have found yet another obstacle, a series of oddly shaped platforms suspended in the void. They looked like some sort of a space station, but the issue there was that they, just like the Dreadnought, seemed completely automated and never responded to any hails. Unlike the Dreadnought though, they were not openly hostile, but still they remained a mystery, as all attempts to scan them ended in failure. Whatever this fortress is remains a mystery for now, but it is yet another proof that, some long time ago, this galaxy was far more advanced than it is right now. Perhaps one day we'll learn what happened, and maybe we'll even figure out the purpose of these powerful relics, but until that happens, it would be better to just keep our distance.
Construction project concluded.
Second file, named Annoyance, was a bit less threatening, but just as unnerving as previous one, if not more. With colonization of Moros, our people established a route towards the edges of the galaxy, which allowed them to explore more stars, and during that exploration, Commander Giraud and CSV Outlier found another black hole, and near it something highly remarkable, a space station. At first we thought that these are just some outcasts from some of the other empires, but once we established contact, the truth proved to be even more interesting. This base, as it happened, belongs to a group of scholars who call themselves Order of Curators, a group dedicated to gathering and preserving knowledge. That in itself was interesting, and Commander Giraud quickly informed them that humanity is also interested in gathering knowledge and proposed them an exchange, but her offer was refused because, according to what Curators told us, we simply had nothing to offer them. That seemed bizarre. After all, we were seemingly the most advanced nation around, but after hearing our proposition for the second time, the Curators explained why they were so unwilling. They were not affiliated with any known empire. In fact, their order was operating from this base since its inception about 11,000 years ago, and they were sworn to protect the knowledge they had, no matter who would ask for it. And that was, well, infuriating, to say the least. The Curators dropped hints and offered us some small inklings of their knowledge, but it was obvious that they have access to so much more. With all the data they have, we could probably build ships that would be just as powerful as that automated dreadnought, but the Curators were not willing to share anything, except for some very minor scraps of information about the projects that we were currently working on, and even that for a high price. They were in fact so unwilling to share their knowledge that when one of our more intrepid civilians learned of them and tried to board the station to steal some of their data, the Curators just wiped his brain. The man was then found back on Moros without any memories, other than the very strict warning to never try stealing from the Curators ever again. So, we took their warning to heart and backed off, but in the following months we still were able to establish at least some sort of a regular trade deal. Since they were confined to their station, these Curators had no access to many luxury goods, and by providing them we managed to get on their good side. Who knows, maybe one day they will drop their guard enough to actually share all they know with us. And the third, final declassified file was named Eden, and this one was actually very close to our home. Right next to Duik's system, the famed place where we met the Alir, was a star named Teneka, an unremarkable system with only a handful of planets. However, when our automated probes entered the system, they immediately picked up movement. Turns out there were about 20 unknown moving objects in orbit of one of the planets, and upon closer examination, these ships were categorized as warships, equipped with highly advanced weapons and defenses. Only thing was, they didn't seem to belong to any nation that we knew of. If anything, they appeared to be hostile towards all visitors to the system, regardless of affiliation. Aside from that, their very odd design was something we have never seen before, which led us to believe that this may be yet another automated defensive relic from long time ago. But still, those ships paled in comparison with the thing they were seemingly defending. a large planet that, according to our readings, appeared to be an absolute paradise. At first, it didn't even seem possible. This world, for some reason, looked like it would be able to sustain any kind of life form, regardless of conditions said life form evolved in. The temperature was mild enough that races from deserts of New Sajar and frozen valleys of Ortis could live here without issue. The atmosphere was composed in such a way that oxygen-breathing human, ammonia-breathing Sundrithian, and methane-breathing Zracon could live in a single spot without need for any life support. In short, the place was perfect and was within our borders. Only thing is, it is protected by that fleet of unknown ships, and in our current state it is doubtful that we'd be able to take them on. Still, if we needed a goal after our war with the Zracon, then this is it. This planet could become the key point for our nation, a place where humans and all their allies could live and learn without having to worry about living conditions. In a way, a world like this, combined with our position at the crossroads of peaceful South and warlike North, could become a vital place for all intergalactic diplomacy. We just have to take it. So, we have a new goal to achieve, but for now OCN will have to regain its strength and rebuild its infrastructure before we can attempt any military moves. And as our nation turned to rebuilding, another decade came to an end, another elections took place, and once more Chancellor Tessa, despite his steadily progressing age, was re-elected with about 70% of overall votes in his favour. And once again, as the year began, he stood there on the Exodus Square of Ortis and addressed citizens of the nation, except this time, there were even more of them. Humans stood alongside Kithri, who stood alongside their Utkavongo lookalikes, who migrated to Arvo in recent years. Next to them stood exiles of Yadra, their claws raised in honor for their lost homeworld. And everywhere you looked, you could see the Aramathi, now second most numerous group within the OCN. Despite all hardships of past decade, they all pulled through, and now all those races stood side by side as citizens. And that crowd was the main attraction of the evening. All the camera drones that usually were focused at Chancellor's podium, today were focused on the crowd and all the faces in it, with Chancellor's speech blending into the background. Except for the last part. The OCN, Tessa said, is no more, for when I look in front of me I see something more, something better. To call us just Ortis Council of Nations would be a disservice to all those who don't live on our homeworld, to all those billions who were born on a different world and under different suns. Even our nations of Ortis are no more, replaced with a single government who works towards a common goal. So, as you see, citizens, the name no longer fits. Now, there was much debate on how we should rename our nation, with many grandiose ideas that would lift spirit and hearts. But in the end, we decided on something simple, something that will tell everyone, within and without our nation, what we are all about. For we are a group, banded together by common goal and common strife. A group that, despite coming from different backgrounds, different worlds and different races, stays together no matter what. There was a nation like this once, long time ago, and before they lost their way, they truly deserved the name they chose for themselves. I hope that we will learn from their lessons and prove to be worthy of the same name. As of today, we are all citizens of the Commonwealth, and together we will prosper among these stars. A toast to you, old friend, and to your great success. I don't think any man in history could claim such an impressive resume. I don't think I deserve a toast, and please don't call me old. I'm already painfully aware of my age, no need to remind me. Nonsense, man. You look just as sprightly as you did when you took the office 50 years ago. Bloody hell, that was half a century ago. Still, come to think of it, you may even look a bit younger. Had Hera worked her genetic magic on you? Well, yes, but not with scalpels or syringes. Some students in biology department came up with something they call cosmetic genetics. For centuries now, companies tried to sell people stuff that would make them look younger. Only difference is this one actually works. What a time to be alive. But come on, what is this nonsense about not deserving a toast? Do you even realize what you did? You fulfilled the dream countless leaders had since the dawn of time and united humanity. Hell, you united humanity that lives across the span of light years, and you even turned some aliens into humans, metaphorically speaking, of course. And the best part of it is that you haven't turned into a bloodthirsty dictator while you were at it. Now that is worth more than just a single toast. In case you forgot, I started a war that featured a single most bloody battle of our entire history, both here and back on Earth. True enough, but it was a war that over 90% of our population approved, and it wasn't used as just a land grab, but as a liberation of an entire species. And don't even try to say that their furballs are not free because they live under our banners. We asked them hundreds of times if they really don't want their full independence back, and each time they refused. Which, mind you, is a smart move since they realize we simply have a better chance of surviving by working together. And besides, from what I heard from our correspondents, it seems that as our citizens, Aramathi actually have more rights and freedoms than they had when their speaker was in charge. Okay, sure, but that wasn't just my doing. Hell, I had almost nothing to do with the actual war. Except you made it possible. You made all of this possible, so stop selling yourself so short. I swear, sometimes you remind me of that terrified, self-loathing, nervous wreck of a kid that you were back when we still worked on that fungus farm. I mean, sure, it's not like you personally led our armies and built our ships on stations, but you were a central point of all these endeavors. You organized all these self-absorbed idiots into a well-oiled machine that now stands a chance of actually going forward in this mess of a galaxy. So if I'll hear one more self-deprecating comment from you, I'm going to kick your ass. You would attack Commonwealth Chancellor, Prime Minister. I am shocked and appalled, and quite frankly, I'm seriously considering calling Special Forces. But you're probably right. You're always bloody right. Makes you a bit annoying. Still, since you're trying to get me to take all the credit, you should take it too. Wouldn't get so far without your help. Of course you wouldn't, and trust me, I plan on basking in adoration and glory very soon. We'll start with a statue, then a starbase, and then, if time allows, I'm going to found my own personal colony, preferably on that Eden we're planning to take. Then, of course, it will be only a matter of time before I declare my independence and crush your pitiful Commonwealth in a glorious civil war. I surrender, right now. No point fighting a losing battle. Still, you will probably have to deal with someone else by then. I don't plan on staying that long. Wait, what? I made a decision, Takumi. I'm not going to compete in the next election. I no longer have the stomach for it. Why? Something wrong with your health? I'm sure Atira can fix you. No, it's not about health, even though by the time the next election arrives I'll be over 90. It's more about... I don't know how to say it. All of it. The nation, the war, the aliens, it's just too much. And it makes me lose sight of what's important. You know, when the report about casualties of our invasion came in, I should have been pissed. I should have been furious at the loss of life caused by these pot plants, but instead all I thought was, oh bother, now we'll have to spend even more money. Same with the battle above the planet. Hundreds of trained specialists, best engineers and marines of our nation lost their lives there, and I only wondered that it would cost a fortune to rebuild the fleet. I stopped caring at some point, and it all turns to just numbers. Some would say that this is a good mindset for a leader. Well, if you find those people, bring them here and let them have a go at being Chancellor. You mentioned I'm not a bloodthirsty dictator, but trust me, I'm one tiny step from becoming one. You just need a bit of a holiday is all. I'm going to book you a trip to Redamon under a pretense of some official delegation. A bit of rest and you'll be good as new, but on the off chance that you won't, at least promise me you'll rethink this before next elections. I will, but it would take a miracle or a catastrophe to change my mind.